In today's episode, we examine 5 fatal encounters involving individuals who ignored warnings and crossed boundaries meant to keep people alive. From a wildlife corridor where danger waited behind low fencing to a crowded beach where predators moved beneath calm water. We begin with the first story, where one step past a barrier puts a woman directly within reach of a predator built to kill. It was May 14, 2016, and the Oklahoma Panhandle stretched flat beneath an overcast afternoon sky, the landscape broken only by fencing, gravel paths, and a few worn buildings along the roadside. A designated wildlife corridor cut through the area, marked by low boundary fencing intended to keep vehicles out rather than people in. Faded warning signs hung along the posts, easy to overlook in a place that did not appear dangerous at first glance. Carla Blythe was 26, a part-time childcare worker who supplemented her income with cash babysitting and treated road trips as opportunities to pad her social media feed. She had already argued twice that day, once with a gas station clerk over posted parking rules, and again with a pair of tourists who warned her that the area ahead was restricted. She waved them off, laughed, and told her sister that people got dramatic over nothing. When the car passed a stretch of open land just off the highway, Carla insisted they pull over. The fence was low, the ground flat, and to her, that meant harmless. Her sister hesitated, pointing out faded warning signs near the turnout. Carla barely glanced at them. She shared that signs like that were meant for people who didn't know how to handle themselves. She stepped out first, phone already in hand, visibly irritated that anyone was slowing her down. The children lingered near the car as Carla moved ahead, brushing dust off her jeans and scanning the area as though the question had already been settled. The landscape was stripped and exposed. Sun-bleached dirt, loose gravel crunching underfoot, sagging wire fencing, and warped wooden posts left from old signage. Wind moved unevenly through the scrub. There was no shade, no cover, and no reason to linger unless someone was intent on proving a point. A man passing on foot mentioned recent wildlife sightings and warned her not to cross the fence. Carla didn't stop. She replied without turning around, saying she would be quick and that everyone needed to relax. When birds suddenly lifted from the brush, she smirked and said it was probably rabbits. The abrupt quiet that followed went unnoticed. What she failed to see was movement just beyond the path. A fully grown male mountain lion, likely a transient dispersing animal, was using the scrub for concealment. Adult males can exceed 140 pounds and are capable of covering 15 to 18 feet in a single bound. Mountain lions rely on ambush and explosive force, typically targeting the head or upper neck to rapidly incapacitate prey. Carla stepped over the boundary fence, remarking that it was barely a fence at all. She crouched slightly, turning her back to frame the shot. Someone shouted at her to move. She raised one hand in dismissal, eyes fixed on her screen. A sudden hush fell. The only sound was dust crunching under her feet. The mountain lion closed the 10-foot gap in under a second. The impact drove Carla forward as the animal's jaws clamped onto the base of her skull and upper cervical region. The bite caused immediate catastrophic injury, fracturing the upper cervical vertebrae and crushing the neck, compressing major arteries and causing near-instant incapacitation. Her phone fell as her body jerked once, a reflexive flail before she collapsed. Witnesses later described a brief choked sound, too brief to register as a scream, before her body went still. The lion released almost immediately once Carla collapsed, backing away as shouting and movement erupted from the crowd. Blood pooled beneath her head as the animal retreated into the scrub, startled by the sudden noise and rocks being thrown. Several adults shouted and threw rocks from a distance, but no one could approach safely. Carla's sister collapsed near the fence, screaming her name. A few bystanders had raised phones before realizing what was happening. Their footage captured only sudden movement, panicked screams, and people retreating. The attack itself lasted less than 10 seconds. Emergency services were called immediately. Deputies arrived approximately 12 minutes later, followed by wildlife officers. Carla was unresponsive, with massive craniocervical trauma and extensive hemorrhage. Paramedics confirmed death at the scene. The coroner later documented fatal high cervical spinal cord transection, fractures at the skull base, and severe soft tissue injury consistent with a large wild predator attack. Death would have occurred almost instantly due to neurological disruption and neurogenic shock. The area was closed that day. Wildlife officials increased patrols and installed new signage warning of active predator movement through the corridor. The mountain lion was tracked briefly but not located. No effort was made to capture or destroy the animal. Several bystanders had captured the moments on their phones, but the footage was not released. In the weeks that followed, the children who witnessed the attack exhibited prolonged mutism and acute stress reactions. Like Carla, another woman would ignore warnings, believing familiarity kept her safe. But nature had other plans along a California trail, where routine proved deadly. It was September 22nd, 2014, and a narrow canyon trail cut through the dry hills, outside a quiet California hillside community, winding between scrub brush and sun-bleached rock. The path was familiar to local residents, used nightly by walkers and dog owners as daylight faded. As the sun sank and shadows stretched across the trail, the canyon grew still, its rocky folds and low brush concealing a predator that blended easily into the landscape. Jennifer Denton was 61 and well known on the canyon loop. Neighbors said she walked it nearly every evening at the same time, leash in hand, pace unchanged regardless of weather or season. A retired employee from a regional insurance office, she was remembered by former co-workers as someone who corrected others publicly and pushed back aggressively when policies changed. She lived alone in a small stucco house backing onto open space and rarely altered her routines. In the months leading up to the incident, wildlife warnings had increased. Flyers alerting residents to mountain lion activity were taped to the trailhead kiosk and replaced multiple times after being torn down. Community forum posts documented sightings near the drainage corridor. Several neighbors later told investigators they had mentioned the warnings directly to Jennifer. She reportedly dismissed them, saying she had walked the canyon for decades and had never seen anything larger than a coyote. She carried no deterrence and continued walking at dusk. On the evening of the incident, she left just before 6:40 p.m., expecting to complete her usual loop. 2 large warning signs had been installed at the trail entrance earlier that week. Multiple hikers said Jennifer passed them without slowing. A small group stood nearby, debating whether to turn back. One hiker warned her that a lion had been seen deeper in the canyon and suggested she reconsider going in alone. According to witnesses, Jennifer stopped only long enough to argue. She said the signs were excessive and accused others of panicking over rumors. When another hiker pointed out the time and the narrowing trail ahead, she cut him off and continued forward, tugging her dog along behind her. Beyond the entrance, the canyon constricted quickly. Steep dirt walls rose on both sides. Boulders lined the trail edges, and dense brush pressed in close. Dry grass shifted in the breeze, and visibility dropped sharply along blind curves where vegetation blocked sightlines to less than 20 feet. Mountain lions in Southern California typically weigh between 110 and 160 pounds, and can sprint up to 40 miles per hour in short bursts. They hunt by ambush, relying on concealment and sudden acceleration, most often attacking from behind. Their killing bite is usually directed at the nape or lateral neck, targeting the cervical spine, carotid arteries, and upper airway. Dusk is a high-risk period, especially in narrow corridors that funnel both prey and predators. Farther into the canyon, Jennifer encountered a jogger heading out. He later told authorities the trail had gone unnaturally quiet and that he'd turned back because of recent wildlife reports. He warned Jennifer and suggested she leave with him. According to his statement, she responded sharply that she walked the trail every day and continued past without slowing. The jogger hesitated and left the area, later describing the exchange as deeply unsettling. Roughly 10 minutes later, hikers on a ridge above the canyon heard a single sharp scream, abruptly cut off, followed by frantic barking. Jennifer was attacked from behind. A mountain lion burst from dense brush lining the trail, closing the distance without warning. Its body struck her low and hard, knocking her forward as its jaws clamped onto her neck, just below the skull. The impact drove her face first into the dirt, snapping the leash taut. There were no signs she saw the animal before contact. The lion maintained its bite and drove its weight down onto her upper back, pinning her chest to the ground. It adjusted its grip, compressing the neck and upper airway, while its forelimbs anchored her shoulders. The dog's leash slipped free as the lion dragged her several feet into thicker brush, shoes carving shallow grooves through the dust. Witnesses later described hearing a brief, choking sound, likely involuntary respiratory effort caused by airway compression and blood aspiration, before all movement stopped. Loss of consciousness would have occurred rapidly due to combined carotid artery compression, cervical spine disruption, and airway obstruction. The lion remained briefly, maintaining pressure until resistance ceased, then disengaged and moved uphill. The dog fled down trail, barking frantically as it ran toward the parking area. When hikers approached minutes later, the animal was gone. Jennifer's body lay partially concealed by brush. Examination revealed severe neck trauma, including deep puncture wounds, crushed soft tissue, and injuries to the cervical spine consistent with a large predator bite. Abrasions to her hands, knees, and face were consistent with the initial forward impact. There was little evidence of sustained defensive activity. At 6:58 p.m., a neighbor called 911 after the dog appeared at her front door, dragging the leash and barking continuously. Deputies and paramedics arrived at the trailhead within 14 minutes and reached the scene shortly after, moving cautiously through the corridor. Jennifer was pronounced dead on arrival. The coroner listed the cause of death as asphyxia due to neck compression with associated cervical spine trauma caused by a mountain lion attack. Estimated time from initial contact to death was well under 90 seconds. Toxicology was negative. Wildlife officers tracked the lion later that night and killed it less than a mile away. It was a fully grown male in poor body condition, consistent with nutritional stress and territorial pressure. But predators aren't only hidden underwater. Some strike beneath calm surfaces, where seconds matter and escape is impossible, like in Australia's remote rivers. It was July 3, 2017, on a bend of the Mary River floodplain in Australia's Northern Territory, where wide stretches of slow-moving water cut through flat, open land beneath a pale morning sky. The area appeared calm and unremarkable, the kind of place people passed without a second glance. But the muddy banks and quiet channels supported some of the most dangerous animals in the region. Faded warning signs lined the access track, easy to ignore, marking a stretch of water that was never truly empty. Maris White was 29, a budget traveler from Western Canada who moved from hostel to hostel on seasonal cleaning and cafe jobs, tracking every dollar and arguing over every expense. She had a habit of pushing back whenever someone told her not to do something, especially if it came with a warning sign or safety briefing. During her first week in Australia, she'd already clashed with a hostel manager over river access rules and mocked a tour guide for overselling danger to avoid liability. To Maris, Australia wasn't about caution or structure. It was about proving that most restrictions were exaggerated. Her travel channel was small, but she filmed constantly, narrating clips about how calm behavior and observation mattered more than fear. She hadn't started the trip alone. Weeks of shared rides and campsites had ended in arguments. When warning signs appeared, Maris pulled statistics from her phone and talked over concerns, insisting the risk was being overstated. When the group chose a safer swimming area, she refused to adjust. They separated the next morning, and Maris continued alone. At the riverbank, she ignored another warning marker, half-submerged, sun-faded, barely legible, and commented into her camera that Australia ruined every good spot with fear. She scanned the water slowly, narrating what she saw: a flat, dark surface, drifting leaves, no splashing, nothing obvious. She pointed out the stillness, the quiet, saying this was what real danger didn't look like. Standing and watching felt sufficient to her. Waiting longer felt unnecessary. She slid down the muddy bank, boots sinking slightly, stopping less than 10 feet from the water. The mud near the edge was smooth and damp, shaped by repeated movement. She crouched, angling her phone to frame both her face and the river behind her. Saltwater crocodiles are apex predators that can remain motionless for hours, submerged with only their eyes and nostrils above water. Adults can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over a ton. Their bite force measures over 3,700 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a small car. They strike with explosive speed, launching their massive bodies from the water to seize prey before dragging it beneath the surface in a death roll that disorients and drowns victims. The river erupted. The surface surged violently as a massive force struck from below. The crocodile's jaws clamped around her lower right leg, just above the ankle, crushing bone on contact. The sudden pull yanked her forward and down, slamming her chest into the mud and knocking the air from her lungs. Her scream broke into a single, sharp gasp as the animal reversed into deeper water. Her phone flew from her hand and landed face up on the bank, still recording. She clawed at the mud with both hands, fingers digging into the saturated soil, but the pull was constant and overpowering. As the crocodile reached deeper water, it rolled once, twisting her body violently. The force dislocated the knee and tore muscle and skin as the limb was dragged sideways. Blood spread rapidly across the surface as she was pulled under. Her arms surfaced briefly, hands grasping and slipping, before disappearing beneath the opaque water. The turbulence lasted only seconds. Then the river stilled, ripples widening until the surface looked unchanged. In that brief moment, survival was impossible. The remote riverside location meant she wasn't noticed missing until nightfall, when she failed to return to the roadside campsite and her gear remained untouched. Rangers were alerted the following morning. Investigators found clear drag marks leading into deeper water and fragments of clothing caught in reeds downstream. A controlled search over 3 days recovered partial remains, soft tissue and bone fragments, more than 3/4 of a mile away. The coroner listed the cause of death as hemorrhagic shock and drowning due to catastrophic traumatic injury sustained during a saltwater crocodile attack. Findings included severe crush injury to the lower limb, massive vascular damage, extensive soft tissue loss, and injuries consistent with forced submersion and death roll behavior. Survival was deemed impossible given the speed of the attack and the extent of trauma. Maris's camera had been filming at the riverbank, but the material was never released. But predators aren't only hidden underwater. Some strike on land, where seconds matter and warnings arrive too late, like in Yellowstone's dense wilderness. It was August 9th, 2015, on a narrow backcountry trail in Yellowstone National Park, where the ground rose and fell through dense pine forest, and the air smelled of dust, sap, and sun-warmed needles. The trail crossed land shaped by fire, snow, and long winters, a place where large animals moved freely and did not always avoid people. Small warning signs stood at the trailhead, easy to overlook, reminding hikers they were entering active wildlife territory. Maren Keel was 42, a regional insurance adjuster from Idaho Falls, who spent most of her year cataloging damage left behind by floods, collisions, and storms. Risk was something she believed she understood better than most. Hiking was how she tested that belief. Yellowstone was meant to be another controlled challenge. Marked trails, known dangers, manageable variables. She told people she wasn't reckless, just informed. At the trailhead, she had already clashed with a volunteer ranger who suggested waiting for a group due to recent bear activity. Maren cut him off, tapped the canister of bear spray at her hip, and demanded to know why the trail remained open if it was truly unsafe. When another hiker mentioned a sow with cubs seen earlier that morning, she scoffed and said, "People mistook tracks for sightings all the time." She started up the trail alone before anyone could respond. She entered a shallow drainage thick with willow and shadow as the forest abruptly went quiet. The wind dropped off. Birds lifted from the brush all at once. The stillness settled in fast and heavy, the kind that made other hikers hesitate or turn around. Maren didn't. She pushed uphill, audibly irritated by how often people behind her stopped to debate smells, tracks, and warnings. Friends later described her as methodical but inflexible, someone who didn't adjust once she'd decided she was right. She chose the trail because it was rated moderate and officially open. Bear spray bounced at her hip, still unused. She believed preparation justified pressing forward, even when multiple strangers advised otherwise. As the trail climbed, the soil grew damp and visibility shrank. Willows and young pines closed in until sightlines dropped to 15 or 20 feet. Blind corners stacked one after another, terrain where anything just off the trail would remain concealed until contact distance. Fresh claw marks scored a fallen log. Several branches lay snapped at chest height. Maren passed two hikers moving downhill quickly, faces tight, packs cinched high. They warned her again, a sow with cubs less than an hour ahead. She fired back that unless they'd actually seen the bear, they were speculating. Without slowing, she told them she'd manage and continued uphill. Grizzly bears in Yellowstone commonly weigh between 400 and 700 pounds and can sprint over 30 miles per hour in short bursts. Defensive encounters occur at extremely close range. When cubs are involved, attacks are rapid, forceful, and focused on incapacitating the perceived threat, rather than feeding. Maren stepped over fresh scat deposited directly on the trail. Still moist, the odor strong and unmistakable. The brush narrowed further. Her footsteps echoed once, then vanished into the vegetation. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Birds fell silent as Maren stepped past the fallen log. What followed unfolded in seconds. The willows to her left erupted. The sow covered the distance almost instantly. Maren never had time to deploy the spray. The impact drove her backward onto the ground with crushing force. At close range, the bear slammed into Maren's upper body. Its jaws clamped across the left side of her face and scalp. The bite fractured the zygomatic arch and maxilla, tearing soft tissue and driving her head hard into the ground. Loss of consciousness was immediate. Blood pooled rapidly into the soil beneath her. The sow released and bit again across the shoulder girdle and upper neck, compressing the cervical spine as she shifted her weight forward. Claws raked across Maren's torso as the bear dragged her several feet into the brush and pinned her beneath her chest and forelimbs. A defensive posture commonly documented in sow with cubs maulings to prevent a threat from rising. Hikers downslope screamed and fled. One fell. Another dropped a pack and froze before being pulled away. The bear delivered several rapid bites and powerful swats, forces capable of causing flail chest, pulmonary contusions, and extensive internal hemorrhage without prolonged contact. The mauling lasted less than a minute. Once Maren stopped moving, The sow disengaged and moved uphill. The cubs were glimpsed briefly before all three vanished into dense cover. After several minutes, shaken hikers regrouped. One used a satellite phone to contact emergency services at 10:41 a.m., relaying GPS coordinates to park dispatch. Rangers arrived approximately 45 minutes later, advancing cautiously with rifles raised. Marin was pronounced dead at the scene. The county coroner documented catastrophic craniofacial trauma, multiple facial fractures, deep puncture wounds, cervical spine injury, bilateral rib fractures, and extensive internal hemorrhage consistent with a short-duration, close-range defensive grizzly mauling. Death was attributed to traumatic brain injury and cervical spine disruption occurring within moments of first contact. The trail was closed for the remainder of the season. Additional warning notices were posted at all access points. Rangers monitored the sow for several days, but did not euthanize her, classifying the incident as a sudden defensive response in dense cover near cubs. In the weeks that followed, Marin's family retrieved her belongings from the ranger station. Hikers left handwritten notes at the trailhead, unofficial warnings describing how quickly it happened, how little margin there was, and how ignoring advice offered no protection once the brush moved. Yet some of the fastest attacks require no cover at all, striking in plain view, like the ocean off South Africa, where danger rises from the depths. It was January 18, 2013, and the beach south of Cape Town was already loud with voices, crashing waves, and the steady flow of people moving along the shoreline. The wide stretch of sand looked ordinary and welcoming, the kind of place where families settled in without much concern. Just offshore, the water darkened quickly, its cold blue surface hiding predators that had hunted these currents for thousands of years. Weathered warning signs stood near the access paths, faded by sun and salt, easy to miss as swimmers filtered past them and into the sea. Lauren Jacobs was 37, who stood waist-deep near the warning buoys arguing with a beach patrol volunteer, while her family waited farther up the sand. She pointed repeatedly toward the water, citing other swimmers she claimed had gone in earlier, demanding to know why the boundary was suddenly being enforced. When the patrol member reiterated the warning and told her not to go farther, Lauren turned away mid-sentence and continued forward anyway. From shore, nothing about her movements looked immediately unusual. She waded steadily, water climbing from mid-thigh toward her hips. Several minutes later, beachgoers saw her pause, then jerk violently as the surface around her erupted. At first, the disturbance looked like a breaking wave. Then the water darkened, spreading outward in irregular pulses, and people began shouting when they realized it was blood. Lauren was a regional sales coordinator from Nevada, accustomed to winning disagreements through persistence. Years of travel had made her comfortable dismissing local advice, particularly when it conflicted with her own judgment. She spoke openly that morning about swimming regularly and being more capable than most, repeating it whenever anyone suggested staying closer to shore. This was her first extended vacation in years, and she was determined not to spend it behind ropes and warnings. By mid-morning, she had already complained loudly about patrols and red flags, calling them excessive and inconsistent. When her sister urged her to stay shallow, Lauren snapped that fear wasn't going to dictate her holiday. She handed her phone to her children and told them to keep filming, saying she'd only go far enough for the waves to break properly before turning back. The water was slate gray, cold, and opaque, with a long, shallow gradient that obscured visibility beneath the surface. Great white sharks patrol these nearshore zones using vision, vibration sensing, and electroreception, detecting muscle movement and contrast. Adults commonly measure 13 to 16 feet and can weigh over 2,000 pounds. Their attacks are typically fast, upward strikes from depth, often targeting the thigh or lower torso. Red flags lined the beach, and warning buoys bobbed offshore following a reported shark sighting earlier that morning. Lifeguards blew whistles as Lauren moved past the final buoy. She glanced back once, waved dismissively, and continued forward. As she paused between wave sets, seabirds lifted abruptly farther offshore. The surface around her flattened momentarily. Witnesses later said they saw a broad shadow rise beneath her before the water surged upward with violent force. The shark struck from below and slightly behind, driving into Lauren's upper thigh with tremendous impact. Its jaws closed briefly, tearing through muscle and severing the femoral artery and vein before releasing. The force twisted her body sideways and partially submerged her. She surfaced once, arms moving in a short, reflexive motion. Blood surged into the waves, quickly dispersing. Within seconds, her movement slowed as catastrophic blood loss caused a sudden drop in blood pressure and cerebral perfusion. She lost consciousness and went limp, her body drifting face down. Screams spread along the beach. Some people ran, others stood frozen, pointing offshore. Lifeguards hesitated briefly, scanning the water for additional shark presence before entering. Rescue boards were deployed cautiously. When guards reached Lauren, the injury to her upper leg was immediately apparent, with extensive soft tissue destruction and uncontrolled hemorrhage. She had no palpable pulse and was apneic. Emergency services arrived shortly after and pronounced her dead at the scene. A preliminary coroner assessment later attributed death to exsanguination, secondary to traumatic femoral vascular injury, consistent with a large great white shark bite. Loss of consciousness was estimated to have occurred within seconds to tens of seconds following the strike. No defensive wounds were present, indicating sudden incapacitation. The beach was evacuated and closed temporarily. Shark patrols were intensified, and aerial and acoustic monitoring increased. Lauren's family returned home early and declined interviews. The footage recorded from shore was turned over to authorities and was not released publicly. In the years that followed, her children refused to enter open water. The shoreline remained outwardly unchanged, quiet, ordinary, and indistinguishable from the countless other days when the sea gave no warning at all. Thanks for watching. Click the next video to see how ordinary moments turn fatal when people misread the animals that have already mastered their environment.